is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a virtual address on Thursday at the Leaders' Summit on Climate hosted by the United States. The Chinese president called upon countries to work together against this global challenge.
绿水青山就是金山银山.
We must be committed to green development. Green mountains are gold mountains. To protect the environment is to protect productivity, and to improve the environment is to boost productivity. The truth is as simple as that. We need to make sure that a sound environment is there to buttress sustainable economic and social development worldwide.
That was Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Leaders' Summit on Climate. Last week, the Chinese president also met virtually with leaders from France and Germany, also about climate action. He said these issues should not be used as bargaining chip for geopolitical gains or an excuse for trade barriers. It was taking place simultaneously while John Kerry and Zhenhua, who are special climate envoys of the two countries, met and put out a joint statement on climate crisis. They both agreed on concrete actions this decade to cut greenhouse gas emissions. So, what are the next practical steps in the battle against climate change, and how big is the potential of green initiatives? For answers, I talked to Marcos Troyjo, the president of the New Development Bank, on the sidelines of the Boao Forum for Asia. Let's listen to his answers. In the last Board of Governors meeting, you said cooperation is both your value and a method. How do you see NDB at this point be able to demonstrate that out of quite complicated situations?
I see it with great satisfaction because the New Development Bank 6 years ago was a dream. It was a project. It was something on a piece of paper. And the institution has moved from being an idea to now providing loans to countries, to its member countries, 76 different projects. We are edging close to $30 billion of project approvals. So it's something that I think is really making a difference in people's lives, which at the end of the day is the most important task of development. And we do so in a very cooperative way. Because I think, as you very correctly put, there is a deficit in terms of international cooperation across the world, is a deficit that we must fight, and I think the New Development Bank contributes its share. I mean, we're talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These are big players, they're important players, big territories, big populations, big contribution to global GDP. So if these countries are cooperating, if they are working constructively on issues of their shared interests, I think that provides a very good example for the world.
One of the shared issues, of course, is about green. Recently, with the joint statement put out by the Chinese and the U.S. Special envoys on climate crisis, people seem to see some hope. Mr. President, how do you see the potential of the so-called green development and green cooperation?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's important for us to realize that we are passengers on the same boat. There is a thinker that I admire very much, Kishore Mahbubani, and he said that prior to globalization, we were all like on our own boats, but now we are passengers in this one big cruiser, which is our planet. So when things that are global in nature, like the climate change, like the pandemic, they also need multilaterally built solutions. And I think this is one of the ways forward that we can adopt to promote a greener economy. There are many aspects with which you can call something green now. I think one of them, of course, is related to green financing. There is both an appetite and a goodwill. It's in the spirit of the times for institutions to provide liquidity and resources for projects that are green, that will allow for the economy to be less harmful to the environment. So I think this is a positive aspect, and one in which the New Development Bank can also play a role, which is to look for those sources of funding, putting them together in attractive projects, and making them available to our member countries. There's something also that has to do with the transition of our economies. I mean, many countries in the world, especially those that have seen their rise in the first industrial revolution, have used up all possible sources of energy. And I think one risk that we cannot run is to repeat the mistakes of the past. So we have to travel on a different path. And this new path also allows for the transition of some of our economies. Emerging economies do rely still a lot on fossil fuel related sources of energy. So there's mitigation, there's adaptation, and there is transition to something that is green. This is a journey. We're not going to do that from one day to the next.
It's
a difficult journey.
China pledged, for example, 2030 carbon peak, but that is a huge goal. Only 9 years left. Look at the coal power plants in this country, about 30 million people that are employed. So this is only one of those many examples of how this switch is not going to be easy. I'm sure also many other examples in other emerging economies of the BRICS countries.
Sometimes when we talk about green, when we talk about carbon neutrality, it seems to me that the focus is very much directed to the production plants, to the energy sources, to the technologies that are going to allow for the transition to take place faster. But we have the people, we have the workers, we have the workforce. And as life expectancy at birth goes up in different countries of the world, imagine, for example, you're a person in your late 20s or early 30s, and you are working in association with something that is closer to what the old paradigms of energy were, and you're simply taking out of the equation. So how are you going to adapt? So a crucial element in the policies of sustainability going forward have to do with the necessary efforts in training, retraining, skilling, reskilling, so that more and more people can play a productive role in the so-called economy 4.0. If we don't do that, then the social disruption, the kind of resources that we're going to have to allocate, for example, for safety nets, for social security, for unemployment insurance, is going to be enormous. And I think there's a better way around it.
But there's also another issue about common but differentiated responsibilities. How do you see this, particularly from the emerging economies perspective?
Yeah. No, I think there is the issue of responsibility. I think there is the issue also of leadership, which I think should work hand in hand with one another. When you look at the relative size of emissions from this or that particular country, it's only natural that the biggest economies of the world, the biggest 7 economies of the world, have they have a bigger responsibility in providing not only the financial resources, the technology, but also the example. For example, the country where I'm from, we know that very well, because following the 2 oil shocks in the 1970s, we were forced to go green in many different aspects. So Brazil, for example, implemented one of the most pioneering projects in ethanol-fueled vehicles that are green in source. They use sugarcane as the source of fuels, and that has allowed for the overall air quality in cities to improve a lot. Same with the hydro power plants.
There are numbers that are suggesting the amount of financial investment I'm talking about all over the world so far about the green, with the name of the green, only 3% eventually brings real results of green development.
Right.
That to us is a very interesting, if not a challenging number.
Yeah.
So how to make sure it's not just a green wash?
Well, I think it's going to depend very much on what your definition of green is. This green definition, once again, it has to be built multilaterally. We want to make sure that no country imposes what the green is to the rest of the world.
What is ESG, right?
ESG. I mean, ESG is something that is also the result of a collective construction. I mean, we have to have common rules. If we're talking about international law, and ESG offers benchmarks, then it has to be built multilaterally as well. When I was a young diplomat, I worked at the Brazilian delegation to the United Nations in New York, and sometimes I was a little frustrated with the pace of multilateralism, but when I thought deeper about it, I said every other alternative is worse.
Yeah.
But on the issue of green, what I wanted to share with you, Tian Wei, is that in the same sense that in the past we used to look at physical infrastructure on the one hand and technological infrastructure on the other, as if they were two separate things, reality is bringing them together. There is a kind of a fusion, there is a merger between physical infrastructure and technological infrastructure. So it is wrong for you to say that, for example, your institution has to have a look, a special perspective to technology, because technology is everywhere. The same thing about what is green, the same thing about what is sustainable. So if you're talking about, say, building railways, there's something green about it, right? It can be more green or less green when it comes to conceiving the project, to the ESG criteria that you're using, the sort of references that you have, the local associates that you can relate to so that the implementation is the best one possible. So no matter what area of infrastructure you're talking about, there's something green about it. Of course, there's green finance, so it's going out there in the market and say, listen, we want to raise resources. It's in the spirit of the times. I think there's lots of resources that are available for that, and institutions such as ours can do that. But when it comes to project implementation, obviously there are areas like clean energy that are more obviously related to carbon neutrality and to going green. But even if you're talking about other areas like public transportation through buses, there is a lot of green work that can be done there. So we got to make sure that this is holistic, that this is omnipresent, both in terms of the sustainability aspect as well as the technological aspects. Otherwise, we're going to miss out on another opportunity, which is to use these technologies that are so widely disseminated to the benefit of traditional infrastructure.
That's a great point. Another way of looking at which I got some inspiration if you're listening to the speech of President Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony. He's talking about the hard infrastructure, mainly the infrastructure in steel and concrete, and also the soft infrastructure in terms of designing collectively the rules and the standards.
Right.
And that, I guess, also has something to do with the future of topic of green.
Yeah, there's hardware, there is software, there is smartware, and there's the normativeware, which is, of course, the, legal infrastructure, the common adopted rules that go along with green. We are looking into those. We want to make sure that we have a leading role in that conversation. Of course, this is bigger than us, right? It's probably the sphere of conversations that take place when the bigger climate change related aspects are discussed that go beyond infrastructure, which is our mandate. But we have a place in the conversation too. And I think the best thing that we can do is to lead by example, to provide the examples. Make sure that our shareholders and the public out there look at our portfolio and they see, well, these projects here, they're environment friendly, they are ESG friendly, they provide for a bigger chance of achieving a carbon neutrality status. Yeah. This is what we are trying to achieve. One of the things that we did recently, that we're still implementing to get there, is a new organizational structure for the bank. So now we have an entire department devoted to ESG, an entire department devoted to non-sovereign operations, so that the practices that we're following are not only those that we apply to governmental clients, but also to private sector ones. So I think we are, once again, extending and modernizing our outreach.
What an experiment.
It's a new development bank.
On the way, always.
On the way. I think one of the challenges is to make it new every day. You cannot rest on your laurels. Otherwise, you say, well, we are a new development bank because we were set up by emerging economies. That's fine. That's pioneering, and that is excellent. And we'll always carry that in our hearts. But there's something else about being new. And I think you can be new if you marry the physical and the technological aspects of infrastructure, the physical and the ESG-related aspects of infrastructure, and also if you have a role to play in how the new global financial architecture is being defined, because it seems to me that in this with COVID or post-COVID world, those like old paradigms, north, south, public sector, private sector, import-led, export-led, they're all going to be reconfigured, and they're going to be reconfigured in a way that is the result of our conversation about it.
But now you also see geopolitics really play a role. Your organization, which is a multilateral institution, of course, you're mainly of emerging economies, but you're also thinking about, expanding with membership. How do you look at, what is going on in the world? What does it mean?
You mentioned something about geopolitics. Great power competition is not new in history, right? I mean, it's something that we have seen a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we don't have to go too far back into the past. Merely the last 200 years have shown how great power politics has been part of the landscape. Mm-hmm. I think the difference here is, once again, the marriage between responsibility and leadership, learning those histories, and trying not to fall into the traps that the political cycles present to you. The concrete experience of the new development bank goes in this direction. You're talking about countries that are truly very representative in their regions. I mean, in our membership, you have Russia, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, and we come to work every day on projects in water, sanitation, urban transportation, smart cities, digital technology, now with an increased emphasis on climate change, on ESG, and cooperation takes place. Cooperation takes place. And I think this is particularly relevant because the name of our institution is New Development Bank. So we have to live up to its own very name. And part of it has to do with membership expansion. And that is why I was very happy when our shareholders gave us the green light to start conversations with different countries for the New Development Bank to embrace new members. And we're in the process of doing so. I think very soon, maybe even this year, we're going to be able to announce some new members, which I think is great because it gives us a bigger capital structure and a bigger global outreach.
What kind of qualification would they have to have in order to be members?
Well,
see, I'm trying to get the names of those countries and members.
Yeah, no, it's a different set of criteria that involve relative size of GDP, the kind of roles that they have played vis-a-vis multilateral development institutions, where they are geographically located, because we also want to make sure, once again, that this global character, the global outreach is contemplated as we go about the membership expansion process. So it's a combination. Of course, they have to be okayed by our shareholders. Our shareholders play a leading role in defining who we're going to be talking to.
Mm-hmm. What about the future, near future? Now, of course, there are many crises you have to fight. Everybody has to fight. But the future of NDB, especially looking at the other multilateral institutions, including AIIB and other development banks, and the World Bank, which is now, like most of the UN system, is under question about its future reform. So where is New Development Bank right now in terms of your growth potential?
Even if you take all of the multilateral development institutions combined and you juxtapose them to the infrastructure needs or the development needs of the world, we have a long distance to cover. So the more development institutions we have, the better, because then they can scale up resources, they can act as conveners of money, of ideas, and I think this is particularly important. I would single out 4 areas that I think are important for us. So one of them is we have to become more of a complex and sophisticated institution, especially as we increase our exposure to the private sector, to subnational entities, to institutional investors. So we have to have more in our toolbox when it comes to the financial instruments. Mm-hmm. we have to play a leading role in the conversation of what new development policy is going to mean in the future. And I think here we have a very good raw material to draw from, which is our own very set of projects. They provide extraordinary cases of development, especially if you want to talk about what a new institution can do that's transformational. The other aspect is, I think, very much in terms of what the bank does for itself. We have set out to be a talent-intensive institution. I think talent is becoming the most important factor of production in the fourth industrial revolution. So the new development bank cannot be an outlier in this. So if you work in operations, you should also understand some legal matters. If you work in legal matters, you have to understand, let's say, ESG. So having more of this multifunctional development banker as the profile, the ideal profile of our institution. And once again, making progress on not only membership expansion, but also the expansion of the influence of the bank. If we do that, then I think, once again, we're going to be seen as a cooperation example that can be replicated. And if that is the case, I think we should be very happy about it.
Last question, Mr. President. We started our conversation by talking about trust deficit. I would like to also wrap it up, probably with a question related to that. There is enormous trust deficit, enormous misinformation, enormous amount of misunderstanding as well. Multilateral institution depends on trust the most. With your term here, what is your plan trying to build trust?
Yes, I think that's a very important question because at the very beginning of some banking institutions, they were called trust, right? So trust and banking is something that goes hand in hand.
Yes.
I know no better way of establishing trust than to establishing day-to-day coexistence. One of the reasons why I think the NDB has been so successful from being just an idea to becoming a player is that these different countries, they come to work every day. So we interact every day. We understand from different cultures, different civilizational backgrounds. The world is very different. The world is very different. It's beautiful. It's different. Diversity. But then sometimes this kind of differences, they hold you back. Then when you understand them and you're able to see how they play out on a particular project, then understanding is broadened. You can build consensus. Consensus is another very beautiful word because it means going in the same direction as of an agreed perspective. And I think we're accomplishing that at the bank. Let us work every day so that this trust is one of the most distinguished features of the new development bank.